Morning, everyone. Let's all take our seats. Roll call, Joan.
Charles Long,
Here.
Chris Mortensen, Michael Shaw,
Here.
Priscilla Manuelito, Kevin Mitchell.
Okay, thank you, Joan. We do have 4 members, and we have a quorum, so let's begin our meeting. Pledge of Allegiance and New Mexico Pledge. Kevin? Thank you, board members. Yeah. Let's go down to item 2, approval of the agenda. Board members?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the agenda.
Okay. A motion's been made by Michael Shaw to approve our agenda for today's meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call. Joan?
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Manuelito, Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. We have 2 meeting minutes that we need to approve. The one from August 24, 2020, it's a regular meeting minutes. Board members?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the minutes of August 24th, 2020.
Okay, a motion's been made by Michael Shaw to approve the meeting minutes of August 24th, 2020. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Manuelito, Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. We've approved that. Thank you, board members. Then let's go to the September 8, 2020 special meeting minutes. Board members?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the minutes of September 8th, 2020, the special meeting.
Okay, a motion's been made by Michael Shaw to approve the special meeting minutes of September 8th. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Manuelito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. Yeah. Let's go down to approval of consent agenda items.
I would like to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda items 4A, 4B, and 4C.
Okay, a motion's been made by Michael Shaw to approve the consent agenda items. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Manuelito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. Yeah. Let's go down to D, study circle reports. Our superintendent, Mike.
Thank you, President Long, members of the board. We have one presentation today that I'm going to give. I've provided a PowerPoint to you. I know Mrs. Manuelito is also, Miss Manuelito is on the phone, and if you're online, Miss Manuelito, the PowerPoint is also present there, but I'll also email you a copy. Members of the board, there has been a lot of discussion about schools reopening, the distance learning that's taking place, also the physical learning, and parents' choice in able to choose between the two for their child. There's also been a lot of discussion about how many students, or if any students, come back to school physically in the buildings, and this has not just been a discussion in McKinley County, but it's been a discussion across the country, across the world. One of the concerns we have, obviously, as an educational institution, our job is to do, to the best of our ability, to educate students. That is our primary focus. While doing that, we also want to make sure that students are learning and functioning in a safe environment while in school. During this pandemic, there have been a lot of safety concerns with respect to our community as a whole, country as a whole, but obviously students in school also, and the harm that could potentially happen if students spread or give COVID to each other or to adults or vice versa. One of the unfortunate parts of these discussions, at least in my experience, and I think most people that I've associated with in the educational community, especially in New Mexico, is the discussion rarely talks about or includes the harm that students face in our communities, and especially in our community, when students are not physically in school. I think it's very understood, and everybody wants, of course, to have everybody to be safe. We as a society have, I think, learned a lot over the last several months, given this pandemic. We have learned, for the most part, it appears, to be able to function in a safe way, in a safe manner, as we conduct our lives, as we, seems like there's even more traveling. Gallup's very busy. As I've driven around the county, it seems that everybody is going about their business in a safe way, whether it's through using masks and social distancing and other safe sanitization practices within their own personal lives and also in the community and the businesses. The discussion, though, has failed to recognize, in my opinion, the harm that is happening to students by not being in school, unrelated to COVID. Schools provide a place, an avenue for students to develop a host of skills even beyond academic. It also provides a refuge, potentially, for other safety, the safety needs of students and services for students that they need in many cases. And unfortunately, those discussions aren't had very often. It's just about COVID and spread. But never, it appears, much discussion on the topic of the harm that students are actually receiving by not attending school. And so I wanted to cover some of those proven things that happen to students, not all students in some cases, but to some extent all students face some sort of deficit by not being in school. Some are more extreme than others. The Center for Disease Control would probably consider one of the leading, if not the leading expert in the world on the COVID virus and the spread, put out in late July, I think it was July, last week in July, they put out a document called The Importance of Reopening America's Schools This Fall. And I wanted to go over that research and that data and the science provided within this document that was provided by the Center for Disease Control to share the other side of the story, per se, the harm that we're actually doing to our students, and kind of pose that question is, what can we do to better help our students while dealing with this pandemic, according to the science and the researchers. And the reason we're doing this is because I think people need to understand that if we are not careful, there is irreparable harm that will be done to this generation of students. Far more damaging, in many people's opinions, than what the virus could potentially do to them, particularly at this particular point in time with the spread rates in our community. Before I go to the next slide, at the bottom here is the source. So if somebody wanted to search that, you could just type in importance of reopening America's schools this fall, or CDC, or you could actually go to this link and actually pull up the actual document. It's only about four or five pages. It's a pretty quick, easy read. But most of the presentation today comes from this particular document, so I want to make sure I referenced it. And I think the challenge here is finding the balance, and we've talked about this before in our board meetings, about finding the balance of keeping kids safe while dealing in a world with a pandemic, but also keeping them safe from those things that happen to them or happen because they are not physically in school. And I think the CDC, this is actually taken straight from the CDC, the first paragraph in this particular document. And I just wanted to read the last sentence. Basically, it's talking about the balance. There is significant harm that people need to be aware of if students are not in school. And at the same time, we understand how we can better protect ourselves from the COVID virus and its spread. But it says at the end of the document, at the same time, the harms attributed to closed schools on the social, emotional, and behavioral health, economic well-being, and academic achievement of children in both the short and long term are well known and significant. And that's the reason we want to talk about this today. They are significant, and as you'll see, some of the research and some of the data shows that we need to be extremely careful during this time. There's a high concern of how much longer we can go about this situation where students are not allowed to be in school before we reach a point of no return and being able to help these students in their learning loss and other losses. It was documented in the CDC guide that COVID-19 poses a low risk to students compared to adults. I think research has definitely shown that to be true, and it seems to be even more so that you see more schools actually attending school students attending school across the country. Spread rates in school among children are low when the community spread is low. So obviously there's a lot of differing opinions. Sometimes, unfortunately, the politics and other things gets streamed into this conversation. Don't want to get into that. But according to national statistics, our area, McKinley County, has one of the lowest spread rates in the country. There are many neighboring districts or communities or states that have much higher spread rates than we do, although I believe most of them are decreasing according to recent data. And reports indicate that children are not the primary source of spread among family members in schools or in the community. And so it's definitely an adult spread disease for the most part. It doesn't mean that it can't be spread student to adult to student, but by significant amounts, the data shows that the spread rate is among adults predominantly. And this last part didn't come from the CDC, this last bullet, but I referenced it a second ago, that New Mexico has the lowest spread rates of neighboring states before school started, and these states around us showed lowering spread rates even with students in school. And I think that's something in New Mexico that many people don't realize, is that we have the most restrictions with respect to school than all of the states that surround us. All of the states before school started had more significant spread rates than we did as a state, yet even their spread rates are going down now that their students are back in school. Some of the states' students are completely back in school. They're playing sports, they're playing football right now, they're doing those types of activities. There's other states a little bit more locked down where they have half-time or a hybrid model, which is what we were shooting for and hoping for at this time. But even with our lower spread rates than all of them, we are still restricted from having our students back in school. This next chart comes from actually KRQE. If you search for COVID trending KRQE, they put out these charts, and this particular chart shows the new cases per day since the pandemic started here in McKinley County. And you can see on the end, although we do have new cases every day, they're fairly minimal. Some days looks like there's maybe one new case up to about maybe an average of 5, 6, 7 new cases a day in our area. And so you can see the flatlining that's starting to occur. Obviously, the virus is not eradicated, but it's important to look at the data, current data. A lot of times the data gets referenced from the start of the pandemic, which we have had we've had thousands of cases in McKinley County. But if you look at current data, that spread has been significantly reduced to very few per day. which is a good thing, and shows that we as a county, the citizens here, have learned how to deal with in their homes and in their lives and in their business to do it in a safe manner so that the spread rate is lowered. The last part of my presentation today will hover around these particular topics. The harm to students in their academic learning, their social emotional learning, their mental health, physical health, and nutritional health. I'm not going to read, obviously, all these slides. They'll be for the public. They are for the public view, and we'll have a copy on our website and on this YouTube board meeting. And also, we have paper copies if people wanted a paper copy. But I think it's important to understand first the academic learning loss that takes place when students are not in school. It is significant, and you'll see some data here just from summertime, how much learning loss there is, even without a pandemic where we're doing remote learning, or some students are even struggling to get to the remote learning because of internet access and those types of things. But it's also very understood in the country and in the world that online instruction is not a replacement for in-person learning. That's very well stated in this document. It's very well stated by our Secretary of Education for New Mexico. Over and over last week he said that online learning, virtual learning, remote learning does not replace in-person. It is not even close to in-person learning. And so there's automatically loss in learning when you're on online, on average, for most students. There are some students that perform better in an online environment, but most do not. And it leads not only to severe learning loss for most students, but especially with students that have heightened behavioral needs, students that struggle in school or have other issues that they're dealing with behaviorally. It's even more severe for them. A couple studies, these next two bullets talk about a study that was done with regard to students just over the summertime. And it said that third grade students lose nearly 20% of their school year gains in reading and 27% of their school year gains in math. That's just in one summer, a couple months. So you can imagine since March, April, May, June, July, we're now in August and we're having some learning, but there's still some learning loss even with the remote instruction. How much it may not be perfectly correlated to every single month, but you can imagine there's a significant loss the longer students are not in in-person instruction. Now that's third grade students. If you jump up to a secondary level for seventh grade students, they lose on average 39% of their school year gains in reading and 50% of their school year gains in math. So it cannot be ignored. And I think about how do you catch that up? Well, we do when they come to school in August, and then we were able to remedy that and then move forward. How much time is it going to take to remedy the longer that this remote learning or school closures go on? So I'm sure there'll be more data that talks about this issue as more data is collected during this time, but the trend already shows that the significant learning loss is severe. The last bullet, I thought put it fairly clearly. The CDC said, the prospect of losing several months of schooling compared to the few weeks of summer vacation due to the closure likely only makes the learning loss even more severe. There was another study done that talked about students' progress in math. And it was having to do with a study having to do with an online math program that students were learning on and the impact of their learning with respect to that topic, that subject area. And it said students' progress in math decreased by about half, with the negative impact more pronounced in low-income zip codes. So essentially, students, when they're learning online, they retain only perform about half as well as when they are in person. And obviously, that's one study. Some programs may be better than others, but on average, according to CDC, it looks like a significant learning loss is even when their student is just on online learning or in a remote setting. I think it's pinpoint a particular point on this slide is that the damage to students in low-income zip codes. Last time I checked, of about almost 4,000 counties in the country, we're in the bottom 50 counties in the country as far as low-income, impoverished areas. Actually, in addition to that, we'll talk about some of this later, but at risk, which is coupled with some of those statistics, is our school district is about at least 95% at risk as far as students. And lastly, remote learning makes obviously comprehension even more difficult for students with disabilities or developmental delays or other cognitive disabilities. And as the school board knows, and as our community probably knows, when students come to our schools on average, they are below grade level when they enter kindergarten. And so there's already an amount of education that needs to be recouped and learning needs to be recouped in their first few years. But when a student is a year behind, it's more significant. It takes years to catch that up sometimes. And so when you have even more learning loss that we're facing now, it's going to take us even longer. And we may not be able to, depending on what age the student is, to be able to catch them back up. And the longer this goes on, obviously, the bigger detriment there is. The next section I want to talk about is social emotional learning loss. Obviously, the data, the statistics show that students, when they go to school, have that opportunity to learn how to develop and maintain friendships, how to behave in groups, how to interact and form relationships, and those types of skill development that takes place in schools is an important part of growing. Now, it doesn't mean that students can't develop those in other ways. They do, obviously, in family settings and other large settings or other activities they may be involved in. But on average, a significant amount of that happens in the school setting because so much time is spent in school. When they are at home and only at home for this period of time, there's obviously a loss in the social emotional growth of students. In addition, for social emotional learning, there's also a host of supports in schools that help students. Learning how to recognize and deal with emotions, setting and achieving goals, appreciate others' perspectives, and make reasonable decisions. Those types of things are reinforced and taught in school. And again, I'm not saying that those things cannot be learned and taught at home, but on average, predominantly students learn those skills, in many cases, in addition to what they learn at home, in school settings. And lastly, the routine of students going to school and doing that every single day, there is a gain for students in being able to practice that regularly, not just sporadically, but going to school at regular increments is important for students to develop these skills. And you cannot replicate most of that learning, as far as social emotional learning, in a remote environment online. It's just not feasible. Next, I want to talk about the mental health effects, which is, these are all disturbing, but the next two slides probably caught my attention the most. I think we know as a country, and I think in the world, but I've seen statistics for the country at least, that mental health is an increasingly situation that many of our students face, an illness that our students face, and mental health crisis is severe in our country, and it seems to be getting worse. Having said that, there are a lot of supports that can help people with those mental health needs. And a significant amount of those mental health needs come from school. In-person learning actually is associated, this first bullet points out, being in school actually helps with lowering depression for students, thoughts about suicide, social anxiety. It creates lower levels of sexual activity, as well as higher levels of self-esteem and more adaptive use of free time. And in addition, it was a little bit further in the document, but I put it in a separate bullet. Also, there is a reduction in the likelihood of substance abuse when students actually attend school, which was interesting to me. And what I talked about at the beginning is the access. In-person schooling provides students access to a variety of mental health and social services, including speech-language therapy and physical or occupational therapy to help with physical, psychological, and academic needs of a child. That doesn't mean that parents can access those in other ways, but typically families rely on those services through public school or other school settings and services. And lastly, on that particular section, or on this particular page, the counselors are obviously trained in our schools to recognize mental health needs of children and signs of trauma. And so when they don't have, when it's just through a screen or that type of a setting where you have multiple students on a screen, obviously it's hard to detect and have those conversations and to be able to find out if students need more services and then to provide them to them. In addition, because of that, children often do not receive the mental health treatment that they need. And in our community, I know that some of our board members and others are aware there's very few services already available in McKinley County for mental health needs. I know that also that it's difficult to find specific experts in different areas to treat and deal with mental health issues. And so there's already a need in our community, and now when we don't have the access through schools to help students find those needs and parents find those resources, then there is a loss, a significant loss. This statistic, or this research was interesting to me. It showed among children ages 9 through 17, it's estimated that 21% or more than 14 million children in the United States experience some type of mental health condition. So 21% is probably about 2,200 students in McKinley County schools, Gallup McKinley County schools. It says yet only 16% of those with a condition received any treatment. Of those 16%, 70 to 80% received such care in a school setting. That was their only access. And obviously when communities have less opportunities or less resources for that, those numbers rise. I believe what I read in some other research that also the economic situation for students increases that need of students to receive that in school because parents don't have the resources to get on their own private professional help. Lastly, students also suffer from serious emotional disturbance or can suffer from serious emotional disturbance when not in school. Especially for those individuals who have a diagnosable mental, behavioral, emotional condition that substantially interferes with or limits their social functioning. School plays an integral role in linking them to those support services. And for those students with a severe emotional disturbance, for our school district, that the data shows that we would probably have about 1,500 Gallup McKinley County school students with a severe disturbance, mental disturbance. This next one really caught my attention, and it's we've even seen some of this in our own community in different ways. But children's physical safety. Often we talk about the safety of children with respect to COVID, but the conversation rarely talks about the safety of students because of not being in school, their physical safety. There are physical harms to students when they are not in school, also for not all students, but many. Significant enough that in most research shows that actually outweighs the harm that students could have by actually contracting the virus. In fact, in New Mexico, I don't believe there have been any deaths from the COVID virus for any school-aged students. Yet in New Mexico, the suicide, the physical harm to students who may have been in accidents when they should have been in school, or other types of related harm physically to them is significant. It's actually increased. Suicide rates among students in New Mexico across the country is increasing right now. Most research that I've seen has shown that it's because, or partly because, of not being in school or side effects from not being in school. These first three slides talk about a more significant issue with respect to the safety of homes. Obviously, most homes are safe and productive for students, but obviously we also know that there are homes that are not safe, and schools play a role in helping students in those situations. The second bullet, teachers and educational staff were responsible for more than 1/5 of all reported child abuse cases, more than any other category of reporter. That was very, stood out to me, is that our teachers represent over 20% of all reported child abuse cases. And as you can suspect, during this time, child abuse cases have gone down as far as being reported. Because they're not having an interaction with teachers in a one-to-one type of environment where teachers can recognize potential abuse. And the third bullet says, during the COVID-19 school closure, however, there has been a sharp decline in reports of suspected maltreatment, but tragically, a notable increase in evidence of abuse when children are seen for services. And then lastly, suicide rates are increasing. I heard from a superintendent in a neighboring district the other day that just in the last few months, they've never seen this many suicides, but have had 4 suicides in just their school district, similar size to us. And that the rate for that is far beyond anything they've ever experienced before. I don't know the specifics, obviously, with respect to whether they were directly school related, but I think research has shown across the country that not being in school and not having those social, emotional, and other supports and learning opportunities and mental health supports has driven that number up. The last section I wanted to discuss, actually 2 more. One is the nutritional concerns. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but there's obviously concern that many students, and especially students in low-income areas such as ours, receive 50% of their nutrition from the school system. Actually, I think this 50% for most students in the country, but in New Mexico and in our area, it's higher than that because we try to provide more food opportunities for students. But obviously, that's a critical part of the development of a child or of a student in our school district or our community. We are 100% free and reduced lunch, which is one of the statistics in our local area that show our need for nutrition. And obviously, we have worked to implement, and this is referenced in the second bullet, we worked very hard to implement strategies to reach as many students as possible through bus delivery of meals, having schools open for all students, whether there are students or not, to come in and grab a meal during this time. But these are difficult to maintain. It's difficult for families as incomes decrease or other financial issues arise. It's harder for them to get to locations to get food. And so there's typically a decrease. And in Gallup McKinley County Schools, at one time last spring, we were producing about 15,000 meals that students were getting per day. Obviously, at that point, we wanted to produce more and have more students reach and receive those meals. So I want to clarify, we were producing more than 15,000, but that's how many students' meals were actually being received. Currently, on average, only about 7,000 meals are being received. We're still looking into why such a decrease when school starts. We suspect that there's an economic piece to this. And obviously some of the EBT cards that went out to students helped with that for a period of time, but that will only last so long. And so we're really concerned about the nutritional health of many of our students. Lastly, the physical activity and health opportunities as far as physical health definitely has decreased. Students obviously rely, not necessarily rely, but find most of their activity by coming to school and participating in activities at school, whether it be a PE class or whether it be extracurricular activities that aren't currently allowed to be had, other than some small group practices for sports. And so I'm just going to touch on the last bullet on this particular slide. It says over 75% of children and adolescents in the United States do not meet the daily physical activity level recommendations, 60 minutes or more. and nearly half exceed the 2 hours per day in sedentary behavior. Current models estimate that childhood obesity rate may increase by 2.4% if school closure continues to December 2020. So as you can imagine, a decrease in health can pose a whole host of other issues with students. It's one of the needs of students, hierarchy of needs for students. That's essential for them to be productive in other ways in their life. In conclusion, I'm not going to go through all these, but I think that basically reiterates the importance of students being in school. And when I say being in school, it doesn't mean that you throw out safety precautions. Students around our state and other states are going to school in a safe manner, conducting their lives, their academic lives in a safe manner, using social distancing, masks, and other sanitization practices or sanitary practices in order to be safe from COVID. But at the same time, they're also able to participate in activities and grow in all these other ways that we talked about that are harmful when you don't go to school. And I want us to read that last bullet. Actually, the last two bullets. School closure disrupts the delivery of an in-person instruction and critical services to children and families, which has negative individual and societal ramifications. Reopening schools creates opportunity to invest in the education, well-being, and future of one of America's greatest assets, our children, while taking every precaution to protect students, teachers, staff, and all their families. And lastly, just wanted to pose this question, which I think is a question that people probably fall on different sides of the spectrum with respect to the answer, but we think it's a question that is valuable for people to consider when they weigh out whether we should have school or not have school, or have in-person learning or not in-person learning, and what the ramifications of both sides are. At the start of the presentation, we talked about needing to find a balance, and I think the CDC document talks about that in throughout the whole entire research and data provided, is that there has to be a balance. If you can't let the fear of the virus, even though you're willing to conduct your lives outside of school with certain safety precautions, that obviously it's not fearful there. It shouldn't be fearful for having your students come to school either, as long as the school is implementing safe practices to ensure best possible outcome for safety, which we are. If not, what you are doing is if you're advocating strictly for students to stay out of school, to be in a remote setting, although we believe that's a parent's choice to be able to keep their student home or not. If you're advocating that no students are able to attend school and you want to take that choice away from parents, you're also advocating for the harms, or at least willing to accept the harms that are going to happen to many of our children in our community with respect to the social, emotional, physical, academic learning, and other harms that we discussed today. So again, I was going to read this question and then finish and conclude my comments and then take any questions. Are we as a society willing to risk the physical, mental, social, and emotional health and well-being of a generation of students by not allowing them to physically go to school when it's proven that we can conduct our lives and return to school in a safe manner through social distancing, use of masks, and then taking other sanitization precautions? So with that, members of the board, open it up for questions regarding this
Board members?
presentation.
Yeah. Board members, questions, comments? Kevin?
I think you gave a good presentation.
Yep.
Answers of all the questions.
Yep. Kevin?
Superintendent, your last words of taking away parents' choice to me is one of the main concerns that I have. Not only parent choice, but student choice. I know of a lot of students who themselves are saying that they would like to return to school. I think by not allowing parent choice, student choice, that we are actually denying our children a quality education that we would normally be giving in person.
Yeah,
Something to think about. Thank you.
yeah, Kevin. Board members, any other questions, comments? Priscilla?
Yeah, today, board members, though, are individuals that are listening online. I just want to say, first of all, yeah, today, though, I hope all you guys are doing okay. Sorry for my absence of me not being present in the meeting today, but I did have a couple of questions. I know we're really talking about our schools in McKinley County, but I had a couple of questions that were raised to me about McKinley Academy. So I maybe we can get an update on that later, but I know that they're part of us, and I know that they are also doing a lot of online classes, but you know, I think we also need to continue to pay some attention to them in their needs now. Also, with what we're discussing today, I know a lot of students look forward to going to the university and you know attending classes. It's a huge transition from high school to college, and I think just continuing to have their best interests also is my concern. And I thank you for the highlight of, you know, the emotional, behavioral impact that this causes on our students. And I think also the physical activity, you know, I didn't really think about that part of it. Um, but I think the physical activity of, you know, being Native American, of high blood pressure, diabetes, you know, those kind of diseases, that obesity that affects our native tribes, we really need to be cautious of that physical inactivities that our students are having now. So, but I thank you for the report. I hope that this does help some of our parents out there. I think we've been getting more phone calls. Well, I have been getting more phone calls about, you know, the choice as a parent, as Mr. Mitchell stated, a choice as a parent that they have. I know it's difficult on some parents to try to be a teacher, a parent, and also working at the same time. You know, I think we see a lot of on social media, in the news, um, a lot of teachers getting praises now and being um, they never I don't think we really realized how important our teachers were. Bus drivers were, our cooks were in the realm of education. They did a lot for our children, and I think we see now as parents, grandparents, myself, trying to teach our children, our grandchildren, basic things that you know our teachers do for us. Um, Also cooking breakfast and lunch for our children every day. You know, it's a full-time job, and I don't know how some parents are doing it that are working full-time and trying to do this at the same time. So I think it's a hardship all around. But I thank you, Mr. Hyatt, for this report, and to my colleagues there, thank you for being present today.
Gushin. Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you for your presentation, Mike. That was good. And I just want to maybe tell board members, give copies of these, you know, to chapter houses, whatever. Make them available. I think as you go through this, this offers a lot of good guidance, and as a school district, how we are dealing with the virus, making sure that our students, our teachers, and staff members are being kept safe. And I know there's politics that's getting involved in it. And I received copies of resolutions from the Navajo Nation, from chapters. But I think we've pretty much addressed some of the concerns that were coming from chapters. And so just provide the information to chapters, Kevin, Priscilla, Ashandi Hiad Ole. And I guess we go forward with that. Next is the notices and communications. You can read through those. Tomorrow is Through Elementary School dedication. So you'll have a lot of activity in your town, Priscilla. Johnny, dedication. Nigi, I saw your name on the agenda. You're going to be doing the closing comments. Kevin and I, we're going to be busy. Is it around this time that we're having?
At 9 o'clock, you have a meeting.
9.
Yeah, 9 o'clock, and this one starts when?
8.
8, so. Okay. So, and then new business. Let's go to new business A. Mike?
President Long, members of the board, we'll open it up for questions. I just want to relay what this is about. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about reduction or opting out of deferring payroll tax obligations with respect to the federal taxes for our employees. And I'll give the short version, and then Giovanna, you can ask Giovanna questions and get the long version. But essentially, we have the option as a entity to stop taking federal taxes out of our employees' checks. Then, from now until the end of the year. Part of the problem in that is that if the legislative branch in our government, our federal government, would have to pass bills that would backfill those dollars, or else our employees would have to pay that money back. On the other hand, if we choose not to do this, and not to give those taxes or let the employees keep those dollars, then if the federal government does backfill those dollars with the bill, then they would lose out on that opportunity. So there's a little bit of a risk in this, but it's whether we want to not potentially have that opportunity or try for the opportunity with the potential risk that it has to be paid back. So, Giovanna, you want to add anything to that?
Mr. President and Giovanna and Superintendent, before we start the presentation, I just have a quick question, and it might already be in here, but when we talk about, when you said about the district being able to decide whether to opt in or out, does that mean that if we decide, okay, we'll opt out or we'll opt in either way, that the employee themselves would be able to make that decision, or once we decide on in or out, that's the way it's going to be for everybody?
That's the way it would be for everybody. So it's our decision. Obviously, this is going to, if we make the decision to let them keep, or to defer these taxes, we need to make sure it's very explicit in writing to them to know what the possible ramifications are, the possible benefit and the possible ramifications. So we would do that.
Giovanna?
Mr. Long, members of the board, Mr. Hyatt, as Superintendent Hyatt was stating, if it is not forgiven in that scenario, then employees will essentially pay double taxation between January and April 30th to pay the money back. If it is forgiven, however, then our employees will have missed out on a tax break. And essentially, we're talking about the collection of Social Security taxes, which is 6.2% of your income. There are some variables in there dependent upon your pre-tax deductions, but essentially that's it. All employees who make less than $4,000 biweekly would be eligible and would be part of the program. And so some of that also is if we have an employee who leaves before the end of the year, we would have to collect all of it back before we pay them their last check, because it's incumbent upon us to repay that money. So there is some administrative burden that's kind of in there with this. should we choose to opt in, and there is potential for penalties if we don't be sure to collect all the money back from all the employees.
Giovanna, for the social security tax, would the districts, they would still have to pay their portion of the tax?
So it's a deferral on both sides, and essentially for any employee where the taxes were being deferred, we would not pay their portion. Now, there are a group of employees that regardless whether we opt in or opt out will not qualify for this. Also, there are some other stipulations, say, because it's a paycheck by paycheck determination, say if an employee does some non-contract work and one paycheck goes over that threshold per that payday, they would be opted out for that payday. So it's very, the way that it's written isn't kind of a blanket statement. It's a, you have to look at every employee every payday.
Okay, so when we, go ahead, Priscilla.
Giovanna, what is out of our employees, what is the high range of federal taxes? Like, what is the highest that someone may have to pay back if we do this? And what is the low range of the amount that needs to be paid back if we opt in?
Mr. Long, members of the board, Ms. Manuelito, that's very hard to say because it's a percentage. It's not a specific calculation per payday. So essentially, if we're talking about basically 2.5 to 3.5 months worth of deductions and 6.2 times that salary. So if somebody was making $3,000, 6.2% times that for each payday, that's what they would have to pay back. So essentially in January, February, March, and April, they would be paying 12.4% instead of 6.2%. And so if it's not forgiven, then they're going to basically be double taxed in the first couple months of next year.
It's, if my math is correct, it's like $250 max per check, and then it goes down from there, or per 2 weeks. It's 6.2% of 4,000 at most, and 6.2% of less than that if they don't make 4,000 every 2 weeks. So that's for one paycheck.
And what's the percentage of employees in our district that are above the 4,000?
It's very few.
Very few.
Yeah, I'm going to guess a couple handfuls.
Superintendent, so you gave the figure of 200 and some odd dollars. So would that be 400 and some odd dollars that they would have to pay back then if they had to pay the 12%, or was that?
Well, they'd be paying their taxes, and I believe what Giovanna's saying is that you'd be paying your taxes in the January for that month, plus the additional month that you got it deferred from now until December. So that's extra you'd be paying.
So we have seen this previously, but not in this format. So this came in the form of an executive order. That's why it's optional. Previously, this happened in 2010, which affected 2011 and 2012, where they actually decreased the percentage by 2 points. And so it was 4.2% for employees across the board. But that's not the vehicle that's currently being chosen. So whether or not it's forgiven, that's up to our congressional leaders to make that decision. So if it isn't, then people will be double taxed in the first several months of FY or calendar year 21. If it is forgiven, then those individuals who were opted in would have a tax break. And right now, we do not have any information on what's going to happen.
Do we have any idea how the employees feel?
So, no, I don't have any data on how employees actually feel about this. And that is the difficult piece as well, is that they didn't make this, as was mentioned, a potential of employee opting in. They made it all based upon the employer choosing to opt into the program. And the IRS actually just issued guidance about a week and a half ago on this.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Right?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Priscilla.
Do we need to make this decision today? Is there a way we can ask or survey our staff if this is something they want us to opt in for them? or opt out. I know with the federal government and everything that's with the election happening and even this the stimulus package that's supposed to come out to help us again hasn't come out due to different reasonings, and I just hate to put that responsibility on our staff if this is not forgiven. Um, and I don't want to jeopardize anybody's income. So, is there any way we can see what our staff is wanting to do first before we vote on this item?
What's the time frame, Giovanna, that we have to have a decision?
So essentially, we could have opted in as soon as last payroll period. It essentially started September 1st. However, the IRS has even acknowledged, due to the tight time frame and lack of guidance, that employers are going to need some time to actually implement the standard. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you some definitive answers, but the guidance just keeps coming forward. So, I mean, if we chose to delay it, we could seek additional information from various staff members. I've had several staff members and a CPA researching this since it came out, and unfortunately the guidance is just not really clear per se.
I think this is just my perspective over dealing with other financial issues with the district for 6 years or so. If you opt in, nobody's going to lose any money. If you opt out, there's a potential for people to lose money. On average, when the federal government typically backfills, actually I don't know a time when they haven't lately, with respect to budgets. So in my opinion, the risk is not opting in and the employees losing that amount of tax deferral over the next several months. Worst case scenario is you have to pay it back, but you already earned the money. So you can only lose if you don't opt in.
Okay.
They'll
Everybody
just
understand?
They'll just be, if in January, if they don't pass the legislation, they'll be double taxed. But
Well, they'll just pay back the tax that they
yeah,
essentially.
And essentially, so because it's an exact deferral, they would pay back the taxes based upon whatever they earned during the
Yeah,
period that it was
yeah,
deferred. So if there was non-contract pay or anything, they'd have to pay back that above amount as well.
Okay.
This is the executive order coming from the White House.
It is, yes, it is.
I think I don't know. My opinion would be, I think I would be more comfortable with playing it safe and just
Opting in.
doing as usual and knowing already what's going to be taken out of my check, and instead of worrying about double something coming out of my check at a later date. So I think if it's not going to hurt me, and hopefully we'll hope for the best, and our employees will get a tax break at the end there, then that's even better.
No, they wouldn't get it. I'll make sure you understand this. If you don't opt in, then you don't get a chance to have less money taken out. So if you don't opt in, then you're going to pay taxes normally. You'll pay taxes the same amount of tax normally that you would in the spring. If you opt in, then you don't have to pay the tax for the next several months, and then the government likely would backfill that, and then you wouldn't have to pay it back. If they don't backfill it, that's the only time where you have to pay it back. But if you don't opt in, you don't get a chance for the benefit.
To opt out, then you would get the benefit, right? But it'd be everything normal.
If you opt out, if you opt out, then everything's just normal,
Yeah.
and you have no chance to get that money. So, if the federal government comes in January and says we're going to backfill it, then all those employees that we opted out for will get no benefit whatsoever, and they'll want to know where their money is. So I want to make sure everybody understands both sides of this now and until the House or the legislative branch potentially backfills.
So board
It's a
members.
difficult decision, I understand.
It is.
And I would
Right.
imagine that most employees would want the benefit and take the risk, but I could be wrong.
Well, I'll make an that we opt in for it. I make a motion that we opt in for it, so that if the legislature does they will benefit in the end. So I make a motion that we opt in on the.
Okay. Motion's been made by Michael Schaaf to opt in the payroll,
In the payroll.
tax
Deferring,
obligation.
yeah.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Kevin Mitchell, seconds. Let's have a roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Manuelito,
No.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. We have 3 in favor, 1 opposing. Motion carries. Let's go down to new business B. Approval of the written inventory reported as required by NMAC 2-2.20.10116.
I make a motion that we approve the written inventory report as required by NMAC 2.20.1.16.
Okay, motion's been made by Michael Schaaf to approve new business B. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Manuelito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, board members. I believe that completes our business for today. Stand for a motion for adjournment.
So moved that we adjourn.
Yes, Priscilla.
I would like to ask Superintendent Hyatt, before we adjourn, I would like a report on McKinley Academy, number of students that we have so far, number of staff that we have at McKinley Academy, and maybe even a list of staff that we have at McKinley Academy. And then our online school that we were that we did start. Also more information, update report on that. Do we have any students? And of course staff who's going to be taking care of that program for us. And I know, Mr. Hyatt, that, I just from the reports that we received earlier on, that McKinley Academy was growing. So I really want to make sure our staff is adequately staffed at McKinley Academy for our students. I experienced a lot. I saw a lot. As a parent, and as even from report from my own child that went to McKinley Academy. So I really would like to have that, the size, the ratio of because I know if it's over 300, that's like our high school. So I think we need to treat it as the staff body as that entails of counselors, assistant principals, and just making sure that we are really helping our McKinley Academy students and staff that meet the needs of our children. So I would like to request that, Mr. Hyatt, Mr. Long. Thank you very much.
Agushi. Michael Shaw, motion to adjourn. Second.
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Manuelito,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
2:03.
2:03, we're adjourned, board members. And I want to thank the assistant superintendents, Joan, our superintendent, and then also Andrew for helping us. So, yeah, board members, thank you so much for your help. Remember, we still have some barbecue over there.